Hello everybody, this is a lesson about simple interest. It's a continuation from the percents we were doing last week. Before we start, please print off the note and worksheet that go with this so that you can fill in some of it as we go along and do a few of the examples. Okay, on we go. So, simple interest. So interest is the amount of money paid or earned for the use of money by a bank or other financial institution. Okay, so when you borrow money, as your parents can no doubt tell you, through loans, credit cards, and so on, interest is paid. So when you borrow, you have to pay. When you save money with a savings account or an investment, interest is earned. All right, now to solve problems using simple interest, there's a very straightforward formula, which is I equals PRT. Okay, and we'll talk in just 1 second about what those mean. I just want to note that when you see variables, side by side like this, remember that it does mean that you are multiplying them together. Sorry, it's a very messy multiplying symbol, so you're multiplying P times R times T. Okay, so make sure you're doing that when you perform operations with them. All right, now next, so we'll just mention a little bit about what those terms mean. So the I is the interest amount, okay, and that's basically what you're finding out. So you're finding out how much interest is paid or interest is earned. And P is the principal amount, which just means what you started with, okay, so or the amount that you have paid in that you are earning interest on. All right, so it's sometimes called the starting amount. R is the rate of interest, and this is given in a decimal. So if the rate of interest happened to be 10%, for example, your decimal would be 0.1. Okay, and the time, at least in simple interest calculations, is always done in years. Okay, so you could have a decimal if it's 2.5 years, for example, this might be 2.5. In the future, not in this grade, but in future years when you come to compound interest, some of these numbers get a little more complicated, although you're still doing sort of the same idea. Okay, now when we actually apply these to a real situation, and remember, if I'm going too fast, please feel free to pause to write things down or to play it back, certain parts if you've missed anything or need to hear it twice. Okay, so simple interest, I found it very helpful in these calculations and these kind of problems to make a quick list first of what each thing is that I'm using. Okay, so my P, my R, and my T, just to make sure I know exactly what I'm doing in the problem and what I already have. And one teeny tiny note, I tend to use a capital P for no particular reason at all for principal. It's just the way I've always done it and the way I learned it. So capital P or small p rather, doesn't really matter that much. The P stands for principal, that's the important part. Okay, so find the simple interest to the nearest cent. So we have $675 at 4% for 3 years. Okay, so the principal is the $675. The rate is 4%, but again, we're making this a decimal. Okay, very important. So make sure you're converting that to that decimal number. Otherwise, your number will be gigantic at the end. Okay, and then it's for 3 years. Okay, so again, time is always listed in years for simple interest. And then the calculation is quite straightforward. Your interest is just these 3 numbers multiplied together. So principal times rate times time. And here I'm using the actual multiplication symbol to hopefully make things clearer. Multiply those together and that's $81. So that's the simple interest of that investment at that rate for that amount of time, and an extra $81 will be earned or have to be paid depending on which thing you're doing. Okay, so we'll do a few more examples on these pages here, just to make sure everyone's kind of got the hang of things and to see a few of the different types of problems you might have. Okay, so a little farther down that same page, question 5 here we will do as well, and I wanted to do this one because the numbers are just a little more complicated so that I could just remind you of a few things. Okay, principal again is fairly straightforward, so $14,095. The rate, so 3.8%, make sure that becomes 0.038, not 0.38, which would be 38%. I'm sure everyone would love to get that much of an interest rate, especially if you're earning something, but it's just not likely to happen. So 3.8% for 5.5 years, so make sure you're doing 5.5. Just a small note, you're welcome to use fractions instead of decimals in here, but I imagine most students will probably stick with the decimals. So go ahead and do that. And then it's just as straightforward as multiplying them together. Okay, so your interest equals your principal times your rate times your time. Multiply them together and you get $2,945.86 with some rounding. But that's what you need to get for that one. Okay, we'll do just a couple of questions on the next page, so just follow along with those printed notes again. And on the second page, or sorry, it's the third page of my slides, but the second page of what you would have printed off. And this says, assume each problem refers to simple interest, and so read carefully and solve. That's the important part, read carefully, and round to the nearest tenth of a cent when necessary. That should say of a cent. Nearest tenth or cent. Yes, either one. Sorry, I'm wrong on that. Tenth or cent. So Marcia borrowed $8,975 at a 4.9% interest rate to purchase a used car. How much total will she have paid after 5 years? So there's a little bit extra in this question that you need to make sure you're aware of. Remember when it asks how much total will she have paid? So we have to do something a little extra at the end of the question to make sure we're taking that into account. Okay, so with this question, do the same thing as always. Outline the principal, the rate, and the time, and I'm really going to strongly encourage you to do the same thing. It's a great idea with any word problems, but any word problems that have the same formula you're using every time, it's a good habit to get into, to list off what you know before you start. That way you can be a little more sure, especially as we approach some more difficult problems a little farther down, of exactly what it is you're supposed to do with the numbers. Okay, so in this case, borrowed $8,975. Our rate is 0.049, it's the 4.9%, and the time is 5 years. Okay, so it's a fairly straightforward to start interest calculation. So you're just multiplying your numbers together, principal times rate times time, to get 2,198.88. But then because we are looking for total, we have to do something just a little more. So this is just the interest only. This does not take into account what you paid in the first place, or that principal amount. Okay, so we have to do one more step, which is adding together the interest rate here and the total, or the principal that you started with, to get a total amount that was paid. Okay, so because she borrowed the money, she will have to pay back the original amount that she borrowed plus the interest amount. Okay, so it's just simple adding, but you have to make sure you do it. And the total will equal $11,173.88. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everybody why we have to undertake that last step. Okay, so some of the other problems in this area of the worksheet are similar to that. Now I'm going to do just one more a little lower down on the sheet, and then you'll be on your way. Okay, now this is a problem that really illustrates why I think it's important to list off what everything means as far as principal, rate, and time. Okay, so Shane took out a 5.5-year loan from the bank to purchase a $12,000 motorcycle. At the end of the loan, he had paid $3,267 in interest. Find the interest rate. Okay, so in this question, we are already given, we're given the time, we're given the principal, but in this case, we're given also the interest, not the interest rate. We need to find that. Okay, so we need to find that interest rate right there. Okay, so the way you'd want to start this problem again is similar to always before, except I've added just an extra spot for the interest because we already know that. Okay, so the principal is $12,000. The rate is what we want to find out, so I've just put a question mark there. Time is 5.5 years, and the interest is $3,267. So Remember, interest equals principal times rate times time. So if we just put in our information into the equation, we get something like this. So 3,267 equals 12,000 times rate times 5.5. And this requires a little bit of algebra or a little bit of just working backwards to find out what that is. I'm sure many of you could do that without me specifically telling you, but I'm going to go through it anyway since I'm on that track anyways. So when we're doing something like this, to get the R by itself or figure out what the R is, because you're multiplying that interest rate times these two numbers here, the way you find out, or what you would do, is you would kind of do the opposite. So you would take, to find that rate, you would do 3,267 divided by 12,000 divided by 5.5. Okay, and there are a few other ways to write that or approach that, but in my mind that's the most straightforward way to look at it, because you're multiplying it here. When you want to get the R alone or figure out what the R is, you have to do the opposite operations to get rid of that number. Okay, so that means the rate, when we're left with, once these calculations have been performed, will be 0.0495 or 4.95%. Okay, now just one other way that you could write this part right here if you wish to, just because sometimes people will see it this way, is you could have your R equals, and sorry about my writing here, but you could have this 3,267, yikes, I'm going to run out of space with this, divided by 12,000 times 5.5. So if you approach it that way as well, that will also work. Okay, whichever way you choose to do that should get you the right answer for that question. Okay, now just one last note. I've asked in the Google Classroom post for you to complete these first two sheets. So complete this sheet with the definitions on it. Complete all of the second sheet that we've done these two questions on. But the last two sheets, and one of them begins with homework 12, simple interest, I would just like you to do the odd numbered questions. Okay, and that should get you a good range of possible ways these kinds of questions could be asked, so you get lots of experience. So as always, please, if you have any questions, talk to me during one of our weekly meetings, or please feel free to email. Thanks very much.